Okay, so let's talk about alcohol-free beer. It's literally everywhere these days, right? It's trendy, it's seen as a healthier choice, and honestly, the market for it is just blowing up. But there's this one nagging question that brewers and beer lovers just can't seem to shake. Why is it so incredibly hard to make an alcohol-free beer that actually tastes like, well, beer? Let's get into it.
And when I say blowing up, I am not kidding. The global market for this stuff is on track to hit an absolutely massive $25 billion by 2024. This isn't some little niche product anymore. No way. It's a full-on global phenomenon, and it's being driven by this huge shift in what we want, especially with younger people being more health conscious.
But for all that success, there's a big catch. And this quote from a survey of beer drinkers just hits the nail on the head. More than half the people they asked said the #1 reason they steer clear of it is simple: the taste. It's just not good enough. And that's the puzzle, the big paradox, the brewers are just scrambling to solve.
So if we're going to figure out what goes wrong with alcohol-free beer, we first have to understand what makes regular beer taste so right. We've got to crack beer's secret flavor code.
Now you might think, well, that's obvious, but the answer is way more complicated than you'd think. We usually just think about alcohol for, the buzz. But inside a beer, that ethanol is a major player in the entire sensory experience. Taking it out, it's like pulling the lead guitar out of a rock band. The whole thing just falls apart.
Turns out, ethanol is doing 3 critical jobs at once. First, it has its own taste, a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of bitterness. Second, it gives the beer that feeling of body, that fullness in your mouth, which keeps it from feeling all thin and watery. And maybe most important of all, it works like a chemical messenger, perfectly controlling how and when all those other amazing aromas get released. To really get what's going on here, let's imagine all the key chemical compounds as characters in a play. How they act and interact, well, that decides if the beer is a smash hit or a total flop. So on one side, you've got your flavor heroes. These are things like esters and higher alcohols. They show up during fermentation and give beer those awesome, complex, fruity notes we love. Hints of banana, apple, even flowers. But on the other side, you've got the wordy villains, these things called Strecker aldehydes, and they're responsible for all the stuff you don't want, those unpleasant, malty, grainy, almost porridge-like flavors.
And this is where it all clicks. In a regular beer, ethanol is the conductor of this whole flavor symphony. It makes sure our fruity heroes shine while keeping those noisy, wordy villains quiet in the background. It gives the whole thing a rich, balanced feel. But the second you yank the ethanol out, the conductor has left the building. Suddenly the villains are shouting, the heroes get drowned out, and the whole experience just feels thin, watery, and totally out of whack.
Okay, so that's the problem. How do brewers actually try to fix it? Well, they pretty much take one of 2 main paths on their quest for that perfect zero alcohol pint.
The first one is what we'll call the removal route. That's where they use physical methods to literally pull the alcohol out after the beer is already made. The second is the prevention route, using biological tricks to stop the alcohol from ever being made at all. And as you're about to see, each path has its own huge problem.
All right, let's look at the removal route first. The idea here is you brew a completely normal alcoholic beer, letting all those fantastic fruity esters and flavor heroes develop. Then you use some pretty high-tech stuff like vacuum distillation or reverse osmosis to strip the ethanol out. Sounds pretty smart, right? Well, here's the catch. These methods are kind of like a bull in a china shop. As they pull out the alcohol, they also take almost everything else with them. We're talking a loss of up to 95% of those amazing fruity esters and nearly all, up to 98%, of the other complex flavor notes. What you're left with is basically a flavor ghost of the great beer you started with.
Okay, so on to path number 2, the prevention route. Instead of taking the alcohol out, the goal here is to stop it from ever showing up. Brewers do this by using special types of yeast that are just, lazy at making alcohol, or they stop the fermentation process super early on.
And this is the big trade-off with this method. The goal is to get all those nice fruity flavors, but without the alcohol. The reality, an unfinished fermentation is, it's unfinished. It leaves a ton of sugar behind, which can make the beer taste way too sweet.
And even worse, the yeast never gets the chance to turn those wordy villain aldehydes into our flavor hero alcohols. So you end up right back with that classic, grainy, wordy off flavor.
And just to make things even more confusing, the very term alcohol-free doesn't mean the same thing everywhere. Nope, there's no single global standard. So a beer that's called alcohol-free in one country might have to be called something totally different just across the border. Just look at this. In the UK, for a beer to be alcohol-free, it has to be under 0.05% alcohol. But jump over to the US, and their non-alcoholic beer can have up to 0.5%. That's 10 times more. Then you go to a place like Spain, where this stuff is super popular, and some of their low-alcohol beers can go up to 1%. It just makes the whole landscape really tricky to navigate.
So where does all this leave us? It leaves us on what feels like an unfinished quest, finding that perfect, truly satisfying alcohol-free beer. It's become the holy grail of the modern brewing world.
But don't worry, the hunt is on, and it is getting seriously creative. Scientists are designing smarter yeast strains that can pump out those fruity flavors without making much alcohol. Brewers are using really advanced hopping techniques to mask those bad flavors and add exciting new ones. And there's this really cool search for something called ethanol mimics, things like glycerol that can maybe bring back that body and mouthfeel we've been missing.
But at the end of the day, it all comes back to this one simple fact. A great beer is a complex symphony of flavor, aroma, and texture. And for hundreds of years, ethanol has been the conductor of that symphony. Trying to make the same beautiful music without it? That's the huge, monumental challenge that brewers are tackling every single day.
And that leaves us with a final, fascinating question. Will brewers and scientists finally crack the code? Will they create an alcohol-free beer that's impossible to tell apart from the real thing? Or is the future of alcohol-free beer something else entirely? Maybe it's not supposed to be a copy, but to become its own unique kind of drink, with its own flavors and its own rules. I guess only time will tell.